The laughter was the worst part. It wasn't a sudden, loud burst. It started as a low chuckle from the jury box, then a snicker from the opposing counsel's table, and before I knew it, the entire courtroom was filled with a soft, rolling wave of ridicule. It washed over me hot and sticky, making my cheap suit feel like it was shrinking on my skin. My evidence, my grand, pivotal piece of evidence, was a cuckoo clock. Not even a working one. It was a dusty, hand-carved block of wood that had sat on the witness stand like a dead pigeon. It belonged to my client Alara's grandfather, and it hadn't made a sound since the 90s. Yet she'd sworn to me with tears streaming down her face that it would sing, just once, a single hollow cuckoo at precisely 3 a.m., but only when he was in the building. He was Richard Sterling, philanthropist, donor, the man whose name was on the wing of the nursing home where Alara worked. The man she accused of a campaign of psychological terror so subtle, so insidious, that it sounded like madness when spoken aloud. The judge, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in a state of weary disappointment, was pinching the bridge of his nose. "Counselor," he sighed, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you suggesting this court accept a haunted clock as testimony?" The laughter swelled again. I felt my boss, Arthur, staring daggers into the back of my head from the gallery. I could already hear the lecture. I could feel the pink slip being typed up. Every ounce of conviction I'd had, every late night spent reassuring Alara that someone finally believed her, it was all curdling into shame in the pit of my stomach. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was a fool, and then I looked at him, Richard Sterling. He was the picture of dignified innocence, his hands folded neatly, his expression a perfect mask of concerned confusion. But just for a second, as the bailiff snorted into his hand, Richard's mask slipped. It wasn't a smile. It was something colder, sharper, a sliver of a smirk, a flash of pure, undiluted contempt that was gone as quickly as it appeared. In that heartbeat, everything changed. The heat in my face turned to ice. The laughter didn't matter anymore. It was just noise, white noise. Because in that fleeting, triumphant sneer, he had confessed everything. He knew the clock was real, and he knew that no one would ever believe it. The judge banged his gavel, but I wasn't listening. A horrifying clarity washed over me. I wasn't the fool who'd been duped by a crazy woman. I was just the only idiot in the room who had actually seen the monster. The suspension wasn't even a conversation, it was a verdict. Arthur called me into his glass-walled office, didn't offer me a seat, and delivered the sentence with the same emotional investment one might use to order a sandwich. "Indefinite suspension pending a review by the board. Pack your desk, Daniel." He couldn't even look me in the eye. He just stared at the skyline as if my colossal failure was a smudge on his window. The walk back to my tiny cubicle was the longest walk of my life. Whispers stopped as I approached. Heads that had been huddled together suddenly became intensely interested in their computer screens. I was a ghost, a walking cautionary tale, the guy who tried to fight a dragon with a cuckoo clock. I could feel their pity and, worse, their relief that it wasn't them. My apartment was silent when I got home. The kind of oppressive silence that makes you aware of the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beating of your own heart. I ripped off my tie, feeling it choke me, and threw my jacket on the floor. For hours, I just sat on my couch, the city lights blinking outside, replaying every single moment in my head. Was I insane? Had I completely lost my mind? I started picking apart Alara's story, piece by agonizing piece, but this time without the filter of my own righteous indignation. I heard it the way the judge heard it, the way the jury heard it. A woman in her late 50s, a career caregiver, suddenly convinced her most prominent patient's benefactor is tormenting her. The evidence, things moved. Not stolen, not broken, just moved. A book on her nightstand flipped to a different page. The thermostat in her assigned patient's room always set 1 degree colder than she left it. The faint, almost imperceptible smell of clove cigarettes in the morning, a scent Richard Sterling was known for, but no one else ever smelled it. And the clock, God, the clock. I'd sat with her in a drab coffee shop for hours listening. She was so convincing. Her fear was so real, so palpable. She described how it started, this slow, creeping erosion of her reality. How she'd started second-guessing herself, documenting every tiny anomaly in a little notebook she kept hidden in her locker. She thought she was losing her mind until the clock started. A single cuckoo at 3 a.m. A sound from her childhood, a sound of comfort twisted into a signal of his presence, his silent, invisible victory. But what if the fear I saw wasn't the result of a conspiracy, but the cause of it? What if she was just unwell? A lonely woman whose mind had snapped under the pressure of a thankless job, latching onto a wealthy, powerful man as the source of her imagined woes. And I, the brilliant, ambitious legal aid lawyer, desperate for a case that would make my name, had swallowed it whole. I didn't just believe her, I championed her. I saw myself as her knight in shining armor. But what if I was just the enabler of a delusion? What if I had dragged this poor, sick woman through the public humiliation of a trial for my own ego? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I stood up, my legs shaking, and poured a whiskey, then another. The shame was a thick, syrupy poison, and I was drowning in it. My career wasn't just in a crater, it was a fossil at the bottom of a crater. And for what? For a ghost story, for a cuckoo clock that didn't even work. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard Sterling's smirk. So around 2 in the morning, fueled by cheap whiskey and self-loathing, I did what any disgraced professional does in the 21st century. I went online to complain to strangers. I found a forum, some obscure corner of the internet for disgruntled legal professionals called the Gavel Pit. Anonymously, I laid it all out, the whole pathetic story, the client, the powerful defendant, the impossible evidence. I didn't hold back, describing the suffocating laughter and the soul-crushing humiliation in vivid detail. I hit post and watched it go, a little digital scream into the void. The responses were about what I expected. A torrent of "you're an idiot, you should be disbarred," and my personal favorite, pics of the cuckoo clock or "it didn't happen." I scrolled through the mockery, each comment another twist of the knife. A few offered sympathy, but it was the hollow, "that sucks, mankind." I was about to close the laptop and surrender to the whiskey when a notification popped up. I had edited my post. Edit 1, thanks for the feedback, everyone. I know I screwed up. There's one detail I left out, probably because it sounds just as stupid as the clock. My client, Alara, mentioned that every time this guy Sterling visited, he'd bring a plant for the patient's room. A bonsai tree, one of those meticulously pruned little things. He'd always place it himself on the nightstand directly across from the clock. Said it was for positive energy. Jesus, I sound insane even typing this. I added it as an afterthought, a final, desperate purge of the case's absurdity. Most of the replies to the edit were more jokes about voodoo gardening. But then, buried in the chain, was a single simple comment from a user named Cogito Ergo Sum. It wasn't mocking, it wasn't sympathetic, it was just a question. Maybe you're asking the wrong question. It's not why the clock made a sound, it's how he made it make a sound. I stared at the sentence. The words seemed to lift off the screen, how he made it make a sound. The whole time, my entire case had been predicated on the impossibility of the event. I was arguing a phenomenon, a mystery. I had treated the clock like a supernatural witness, its testimony a ghostly cry for justice. I had been so caught up in the what that I never, not once, seriously considered the how. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through the alcoholic fog in my brain, the bonsai tree. He always placed it himself, always in the same spot, directly opposite the clock. It wasn't a gesture of goodwill, it was an action, it was part of the mechanism. The pieces started to click into place, not with a satisfying snap, but with a slow, sickening grind. I wasn't a fool for believing in a haunted clock. I was a fool for not realizing it was a machine. That single comment on the forum didn't just sober me up. It lit a fire under me. The shame and self-pity evaporated, replaced by something else, something sharp and obsessive. I wasn't a lawyer anymore, I was a hunter. My suspension gave me the one thing I'd never had, time. My apartment transformed from a pit of despair into a chaotic command center. The floor became a mosaic of takeout containers and legal pads covered in frantic diagrams. Coffee cups bred in the sink. I spent days falling down internet rabbit holes, my search history a schizophrenic mess of legal precedents, engineering wikis, physics blogs, and hobbyist sites for electronics enthusiasts. I learned about resonant frequencies, magnetic induction, and microactuators. I read about ultrasonic waves and their effects on aged metals. For a few days, I was convinced it was infrasound, that he was projecting a low-frequency hum that only Alara was sensitive to, a classic trope of ghost stories. But it felt clumsy, imprecise. Sterling was anything but clumsy. My obsession turned to the man himself. I abandoned legal databases and started digging into the man, not the philanthropist. Public records were a dead end. His official biography was a sanitized piece of corporate PR. I needed to find the person he was before the money, before the reinvention. I remembered his alma mater from the court filings. For 2 solid days, I scoured online archives of the university's student newspaper, year by year, issue by issue, until my eyes burned. Nothing, it was like he hadn't existed. Just as I was about to give up, to admit this new theory was just a more elaborate delusion, I found an obscure, barely functional alumni message board from the early 2000s. I searched for his name, one hit, a post from 2003 by a former classmate reminiscing about their senior year. The post read, "Does anyone remember Richie Sterling's senior project, the thing that could make the professor's keys dance in the bowl on his desk? Kid was a legit genius before he, well, you know. That was the breadcrumb I needed. Senior project. I went back to the university's digital archives, but this time I searched the engineering department's records for award winners from his graduating year. And there he was, a grainy black and white photo of a young Richard Sterling grinning, holding a clunky robotic arm. The article praised him as a prodigy of micromechanics and wireless transmission, detailing his award-winning project, a device that could manipulate small metal objects from across a room using targeted electromagnetic pulses. The article mentioned he dropped out a semester later after a lab accident. No details. He inherited his family's fortune and the prodigy engineer was buried, forgotten by everyone. Everyone except him. I stood up from my chair, my body buzzing. The theory that formed in my mind was monstrous in its elegance. I could see it all. The bonsai tree wasn't just a plant. It was a Trojan horse. The ceramic pot, the decorative rocks, it would be so easy to conceal a small battery-powered emitter inside, and the cuckoo clock. It was an antique, a delicate dance of gears and levers and weights, all made of old, responsive metal. All he'd need to do was find the resonant frequency of one specific component. From the hallway, with a custom-made device in his pocket, maybe disguised as a pen, he could send the signal. The emitter in the pot would activate, sending a focused, invisible pulse across the room. The targeted metal part inside the clock would vibrate, just enough to jostle the mechanism and release the bird. Cuckoo, just once, it was the perfect crime. Not a physical assault, but a psychological one. An act of gaslighting so precise and bizarre it was indistinguishable from a delusion. He wasn't trying to hurt Alara. He was trying to erase her, to make her and everyone else believe that her own mind was betraying her. He was proving he could touch her without leaving a fingerprint, scream in her ear without making a sound. It was an act of absolute power and absolute contempt. And I had walked right into his trap, presenting his masterpiece of psychological torture to the court as a ghost story, making myself his final, unwitting punchline. The rage I felt was so pure, so cold, it was almost calming. He didn't just fool me. He'd used me to put the final, perfect flourish on his work of art. And I was going to smash it to pieces. The theory was one thing, proving it was another. I needed to get back into that room. Alara had been fired, of course. Her access was gone. And mine was less than zero. Going through official channels was impossible. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I broke the law. I spent 2 days watching the nursing home from my car across the street, learning the routines. The night shift was lazy. The security guard, a kid named Leo who was more interested in his phone than his monitors, took his smoke break at 2:30 a.m. like clockwork. The fire escape on the west wing had a faulty latch. It was disgustingly easy. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and stale regret. I moved silently down the carpeted hallway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Room 237. The door was unlocked. A new patient was in the bed, a frail old woman breathing with a soft, rattling sound. I ignored her. My eyes went straight to the wall. The cuckoo clock was still there. The new family probably thought it was a charming antique. I pulled out a small toolkit and a high-resolution digital camera. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I carefully took the clock off the wall. It felt heavier than I expected. I laid it on the floor and gently opened the small wooden panel on the back. A wave of dust and the smell of old oil hit me. Inside was a beautiful, intricate mess of brass gears and tiny chains. I photographed everything. Then, using a pair of fine-tipped tweezers and a magnifying glass, I started my search. It took me almost 20 minutes. My back was screaming, and every creak of the old building sent a jolt of panic through me. And then I saw it. On a small brass lever connected to the bird's release mechanism, there was a tiny, almost invisible scratch. It was fresh. And next to it, clinging to the oil, was a minuscule speck of something dark. It wasn't dust. It looked like metal dust, a fine, dark powder. It was the kind of abrasion that would be caused by a repeated, high-frequency vibration. The kind of vibration that would leave no other trace. This was it, the reinterpretation of the evidence. It wasn't haunted, it was harassed. My second discovery was pure dumb luck. Tucked behind the headboard of the bed, I found a small, forgotten piece of paper. It was a maintenance report. I almost dismissed it, but a familiar name caught my eye. A donation from the Sterling Foundation for a full electrical and communications systems upgrade on this wing, completed just 6 months ago. Why would a philanthropist pay to rewire a single wing of a nursing home? Unless the upgrade wasn't an improvement, unless it was an installation. A system designed to amplify his signal within these walls, and perhaps to block any outside interference that might accidentally trigger his little toy. He wasn't just playing the game. He'd built the whole damn casino. I didn't go to the police. What would I say? I trespassed, found a scratch, and have a conspiracy theory based on a college newspaper. They'd laugh me out of the station. No, this wasn't for them. This was for him. The next day, I walked into Richard Sterling's corporate headquarters without an appointment. I told the terrified receptionist my name and that I had information about room 237. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in his ridiculously opulent office, the city spread out like a map behind him. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked amused. I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. The engineering award, the electromagnetic pulses, the bonsai pot. The metal filings on the brass lever, the bespoke electrical wiring. I watched his face for any flicker of fear or denial. There was none. He just listened, a small, appreciative smile playing on his lips, as if I were a student presenting a particularly clever thesis. When I finished, the room was silent. He steepled his fingers, leaned back in his leather chair, and finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "That's a remarkable story, Daniel," he said. "Truly, the level of detail is fascinating, but let's be practical. Even if a single word of what you just said were true, who would believe you? A disgraced, suspended lawyer trespassing and spinning wild tales about radio waves and bonsai trees. All to defend a woman who, by all accounts, has had a complete psychotic break. Who do you think they'll believe?" He stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. "You see, you've made the classic mistake. You think this is about truth. It was never about truth. It was about art." His eyes met mine in the reflection of the glass. They were the same eyes from the courtroom, cold, triumphant, and utterly devoid of humanity. He had me, and he knew it. I didn't win, not in any way the world recognizes as winning. I walked out of Richard Sterling's office feeling hollowed out, the cold certainty of his victory a stone in my gut. He was right, my evidence was a narrative, not a case. A collection of coincidences and technical theories that would sound like the ravings of a madman. In the eyes of the law, I had nothing. So I stopped trying to play by the rules. That night I compiled everything. My frantic research notes, the photos of the clock's mechanism, the grainy scan of the university newspaper, the maintenance report, and a detailed step-by-step account of my theory. I even included a transcript from memory of my final conversation with Sterling. I packaged it all into an anonymous email and sent it to a single recipient. A local, fiercely independent journalist named Jessica Finch. Her blog, The City Serpent, was notorious for its takedowns of the city's untouchable elite. She didn't care about admissible evidence, she cared about a good story, and I had one hell of a story. I didn't hear anything for a week. I started to think she'd just deleted it. Then one morning it was there. The headline was explosive. The philanthropist's ghost inside Richard Sterling's alleged campaign of high-tech gaslighting. It was all there. Jessica had done her own digging, found two other former employees from different Sterling-funded institutions who had left under mysterious, stress-related circumstances. The story didn't prove anything in a legal sense, but it painted a picture. It planted a seed of doubt. It turned the whispers into a public conversation. Sterling's lawyers issued furious denials, of course, but the damage was done. The Nursing Homes Board launched an internal investigation. A major charity publicly severed ties with him. His perfect, benevolent mask had been cracked, and people could finally see the monster underneath. Alara didn't get a payout, she didn't get a public apology. But I went to see her at her small apartment. I showed her the article. As she read it, her hands shaking, she began to cry, not tears of sadness, but of relief. The kind of soul-deep relief that comes from finally being seen. "So I'm not crazy," she whispered, more to herself than to me. That was her victory. As for me, the Bar Association officially disbarred me for professional misconduct and illegal trespassing. My career was over. I was a pariah. I posted one last time in the gavel pit. Final update, it's me, the cuckoo clock lawyer. Well, I'm not a lawyer anymore. I got the official notice today. I was right about everything. The guy, the tech, all of it. I managed to get the story out and it blew up his life pretty good, but it cost me my own. My client, Alara, she's doing better. Someone finally believed her and that was all she ever really wanted. So did I win? I don't know. I guess I learned that some fights aren't about winning. They're about making sure the monster knows it can be seen, even in the dark. It was worth it, I think.